going to get this day kicked off. I'm going to introduce Melissa Fischer. Melissa Fischer supervises the biosolids management program of the sanitation districts of Los Angeles County. This includes 500,000 wet tons per year of Class B biosolids that go to composting, land application, and landfill. LA County Sanitation District owns the Tulare Lake Compost, which is a biosolids composting facility located in San Joaquin Valley near Kettleman City. LA County Sanitation District is co-owner with the Inland Empire's Utilities Agency of the largest indoor composting facility in the country, and the Inland Empire Regional Composting Facility. Melissa is a member of the board of Association of Compost Producers, and she is here to kick off this next couple hours. It's going to be fun. So thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Katie. Casey. Sorry. Yeah. I've never read my presentation off a computer, and of course I have to access it because I have to do security. Okay. Good morning. I'm Melissa Fischer and moderator of this first panel, which is called From Siting to Permitting to Marketing. What does it take to profitably construct and operate a new organics facility in the state of California? We're going to have an interesting cast of 30 people who's going to help in this presentation. And I've had the honor of having personal conversations with all of them, exploring answers to this question. And what is clear is it is not simple. It's really not possible to talk about one issue without talking about the whole. And a statement someone may make that is true in one context is not true in another. We've put together a sort of a scripted conversation just to walk through and hit the highlights of what the panelists believe are the most pressing issues affecting the development of new solid waste management infrastructure in the state. It's going to take us about 50 minutes to run through that. And during that, if there are things that are said that you want to respond to or have questions about, please make some notes. We have set this up to have a very lengthy 2-hour Q&A period here. And there's a lot of expertise in this room, both in the panel and in the audience. And we really encourage a really healthy and respectful dialogue this morning. Okay, panelists, please, let's come on up and do our thing.
Good morning again. The great state of California intends to mitigate climate change while enriching its most vital asset, its agricultural lands.
By minimizing methane emissions through the reduction of organic materials that are sent to landfills.
Instead, organic materials will be diverted to facilities that create nutrient-rich soil amendments,
which, when applied to California's farmland, will increase soil organic matter, reduce water demand, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, support carbon sequestration, and enhance crop yield.
What a progressive, enlightened state. California is leading the country. I'm here to make an honest living that's good for the planet and my bank account. My biggest customers will be farmers. I can transform agricultural waste and food waste into outstanding compost. I'll site in the San Joaquin Valley.
You're going to need a solid waste facilities permit. Do you have a site in mind?
Yes, the San Joaquin Valley.
Is that going to be in San Joaquin County?
Sure.
Well, you're going to need land use approvals. You'll need to also complete an E-177 form. So head on over to the Community Development Planning Department, start the process to get your CUP. You can find the E-177 form at CalRecycle website.
Thank you. You're so very helpful. I'll come back to you when I've got all of that.
San Joaquin Valley is one of the most polluted air basins in the nation. We need less emissions, not more emissions, before we can have healthy air to breathe. We still can do issue permits to composting facilities, but you will have costly mitigation measures to offset your new emissions.
Why are we mitigating the mitigators? Compost reduces emissions from landfills by over 85%.
Compost may reduce climate change emissions, but can dramatically increase ground level pollutants that can cause health problems both locally and regionally.
Don't side in the San Joaquin Valley. You'll have to truck all those feedstocks over the hill. We can't absorb more PM10 emissions from diesel trucks. LA should stop dumping its waste in the San Joaquin Valley. Build the facility in LA.
Sure, I'll site in LA. It will be cheaper to truck my finished compost to the valley than to haul all the feedstock.
Feedstocks need to be trucked in and compost needs to be shipped further and further away from these facilities. In Los Angeles, transportation costs more than the product in many cases. As materials are shipped even further away during the next decade, how do we keep customers interested in paying more to cover these transportation costs? Perhaps a subsidy to incentivize compost users that would help with the material acquisition costs as well as transportation.
It's impractical to site in Los Angeles. Regulatory costs are prohibitive.
Consider keeping the technology simple. Windrow composting does not require a permit.
It's better to have 50 small composters than one large.
Are cities better served by small facilities or large regional ones? That's a good question. It depends on the situation. How much feedstock do they have? Smaller facilities seem easier to permit.
Seems like the science is sometimes omitted in the rulemaking process. Compost mulch is viewed as a positive BMP for increasing soil moisture levels. Never mind that when spread thin, a certain percentage of nutrients will pass through, which is leachate. Yet, if one pushes all the compost into a big pile, and where even a large rain event such as Houston had, it still won't pass through the pile. Now we have water quality issues. Federal regulations say horses are twice as bad as cows, even though horses weigh 25% less and have more primitive digestive systems and eat less per pound of body weight. Horse manure, which includes a very high carbon wood shaving, which uses wood shavings used in bedding as a feedstock, and is very benign compared to other manures. No room in regulations for determining the danger of feedstock NPK levels. The best compost should be generated as close to the feedstock generation as possible. Tracking the cost should be properly accounted for when analyzing a site.
Remember, the San Joaquin Valley doesn't want increased truck traffic. Urban and rural organics integration requires looking at the whole picture. Ag is the only market large enough to provide the outlet, but it does not have a daily demand. You have to store tonnage and wait for the farmer to need it. The San Joaquin Valley and the Imperial Valley have the farms. Los Angeles and Orange County don't have farms. Do you go chip and grind to avoid the long distance haul, or do you take the feedstock to the valleys and compost it there?
Currently, siting facilities requires education for all regulators. There's a lot going on out there. Having this facility available now to show them the benefit will help over time and help everybody become more familiar with the objective.
Cities don't want dust, odors, and vectors. It takes a lot of education. An urban setting should be no problem if managed right. But one facility with a bad reputation can make it difficult for everyone. The state has to educate to the point that one bad actor does not upset the cart.
Facilities are often located near the source of the feedstocks. In densely populated areas like Los Angeles, the feedstock volumes overwhelm finished product market demands. Land Use Authority will need to ensure mitigation for trash and odors from tricky feedstocks. This will create some siting challenges. The trade-off is more trucking to get to areas away from urban populations.
Avoid it all. Stay out of South Coast, San Joaquin Valley. The permit costs make it impossible to make any money. The private sector can't survive in this regulatory climate.
You need to have your act together or you'll lose a lot of time and money in this process. You have to find out if you can even put your project in this jurisdiction. What are the zoning codes? Does your facility fit into the general plan?
We welcome biosolids composting facilities We want to foster commerce and improve soil health. We have a vocal minority that is concerned about diseases transmitted from biosolids to humans. Our problem is one of language. We cannot sell the science of composted biosolids to elected leaders or the constituents when the EPA refuses to acknowledge that composted biosolids are compost, not biosolids.
Compost is not biosolids. Composted biosolids bear no resemblance to the product it was manufactured from. You've got to use language that supports the product. Engineers and scientists have to consider how technical language plays to lay people.
Unnecessary regulatory costs are pushing out the small composters. It's far better to have 50 small composters rather than one large facility on the environment.
Where is the urban market?
Sell to farmers, that market's lost. You make your money on the front end on the tip fees.
We want the organics on the ground, but the nitrogen management plans are limiting what we can apply. The nitrogen in organic soil amendments isn't readily available. It costs too much to spread. I can get a higher yield with chemical fertilizers, which cost less and are easier to apply.
Do chemical fertilizers cost less? Are you considering the true cost?
We need the organics on the ground. It is the legacy of management practices that has reduced soil organic matter to less than half of 1% in much of the San Joaquin Valley. We understand the critical role of the soil microbiome in crop health and yield and in carbon sequestration.
It's the mismanaged use of fertilizers that has contaminated groundwater in some areas of the Central Valley. Many communities in the Central Valley don't have access to safe drinking water because of this. Nitrogen management plants are critical to protecting groundwater quality.
We want clean air and clean water for rural communities as well as a non-toxic environment for farm workers. Composting is a non-combustion solution to agricultural waste that generates new jobs. We want the latest technology in local composting for the San Joaquin Valley.
To access greenhouse gas reduction funding for sites near disadvantaged communities, the proponent must involve the communities and provide benefits to those communities.
If I site near these disadvantaged communities, I might have a ready labor pool and I might qualify for state funding. I wonder if the case for lower emissions could be made for a facility in the San Joaquin Valley if the full cycle is considered, amendment hauling and compost delivery haul. It has to be possible to look at the net impact for the state. It can't be chopped up by air district.
I agree. Transportation emissions can be very important considerations in the CEQA process. But we aren't allowed by the Clean Air Act to consider transportation emissions under the district's permitting process.
The cost of compliance with a local air district can kill a project. How to modify if overall emissions would be reduced? How to show the net reduction to get around air district requirements? What if the project is reducing mobile source emissions? How to account for more flexibility with the stationary source? There must be a way to cross the line.
This is a difficult issue to solve. We continue to work with our air district partners to determine how to recognize all the benefits of diverting from landfill to ease the permit requirements.
If requirements on stationary emissions for compost operations make composting infeasible in one location, then the alternative is increasing mobile emissions by trucking further distances. You have no lock on feedstocks and market revenue is unproven, and you'd like a 20-year loan, which you may only have 14 or 15 productive years to pay off by the time you permit and construct your facility?
I'm sure the feedstocks will be there. The state has mandated a 50% reduction in organics going to landfills by 2020. The material has to go somewhere, and there's a glut of biomass in the state.
Then municipalities must be looking for contracts with entities such as yours to take their diverted material.
They already have contracts with franchise haulers. The market is changing. The state knows all the soil amendment need markets. They are in the process of bolstering markets.
We don't have teeth in existing legislation that gives us the authority to mandate municipal uses of soil amendments made from diverted organics.
I can't authorize a loan under these circumstances.
It's very difficult to make a business case because it's tough to get a lock on a revenue stream. Hauling and recycling contracts get bid every 5 years, so it's hard to lock over a 20-year loan period. Feedstock and revenue streams are not stable for the facility or for the facility's life. How do you set the rates for it?
Non-municipal and waste companies have serious issues obtaining financing due to the inconsistent revenue streams. Feedstock contract duration will often be different, often shorter than loan durations. Municipalities and waste companies are going to be the ones doing the heavy lifting on the new infrastructure, and Cal Recycle needs to understand that.
In a franchise setting where feedstock is collected by the franchise hauler, the ratepayer is ultimately responsible for cost increases due to material handling and processing. Ratepayers are sensitive and most cases require a compelling reason to accept increases.
The private sector has a hard time competing with government agencies that control the flow of feedstock. Many times, controlling flow to the demise of the ratepayers. Franchise haulers may offer to build anaerobic digestion in exchange for a 20-year hauling contract extension. Ratepayers will pay a lot more for hauling to someone who lacks the expertise to manage an organics facility. How many franchise haulers are going to recruit the expertise needed to properly plan, build, and operate a composting facility?
The agency won't commit to guarantee feedstock, and I take all the risk.
Most facilities fail because they're not sited properly. Odor issues create too much tension with the local residents. The facility is sited 10 miles away from the nearest community. Our intention was to be the most remote compost site in the country. It shouldn't have to be like that, especially in a state that wants 200 new facilities in less than 10 years. It's in an urban area that it's the urban area that generates the feedstock. We need partnerships with the public sector.
By 2025, we will see a 75% reduction in organics going to landfills. We estimate the need for 200 new organic management facilities by then.
California is infamous for its environmental regulations, but I don't expect much trouble. After all, compost is all about restoring the environment, and California has made healthy soils a priority.
We really need a streamlined permitting process for organics management facilities.
Streamlined, the governor's office, GoBiz, they can help set up a statewide streamlined process like was done for dairy digesters.
GoBiz has no category for solid waste or compost or agriculture. Here's a farm supplies wholesaler category. It says, if category not found, try general info. Nothing that corresponds to permitting my solid waste management facility. Where do I start?
People need to understand what are the 11 permits. You have to obtain them in what order. Why does it take 7 years to get a water permit? Why an EIR versus a negative deck? Why a supplemental EIR?
Well, that's because CEQA is the biggest time killer. We need more state support for local enforcement agencies for expediting permitting.
Consistency of agency review and understanding would be helpful. Local planning agency, water, air, etc.
Cities have the greatest challenge because most don't have a compost designation, industrial or agricultural. Most planners will see one solid waste permit in their career. We need education of planning commissions and city councils. NIMBYs will come to the fore and stop most permitting. The state could take the lead to show that if done correctly, these facilities are good.
The project proponent has the obligation to submit a detailed and accurate permit application for Regional Water Board review. This will streamline the process and allow the board to make efficient determinations regarding water quality.
People have no idea of the complexity. Responsible agencies like the Water Board, Air District, Cal Recycle, CDFA, and others may add requirements to a mitigated negative deck via comment letters to the lead agency. Your land use permit will have various environmental restrictions in it, and the project proponents may not even have a full understanding of how to engage the various agencies.
Don't finish your design before talking to the Water Board. Get to know the staff at the Water Board. Have a real conversation about the project. Come to us and ask. Don't just communicate through the filter of the CEQA process.
We have seen situations where the project proponent has already purchased equipment and subsequently tries to obtain a permit to use it. Proponents need to initiate discussion with the regulators before securing equipment. The permitting process is often complicated and time-consuming and requires a lot of back and forth communication with the regulating agency. Taking this approach will avoid the situation where a project proponent has purchased equipment that cannot be permitted.
The California Environmental Quality Act. I should start here, but everyone wants me to talk with them from the beginning. The Water Board, Air District, Cal Recycle, they get to take a shot at me twice, in CEQA and in their own permitting process.
CEQA is a huge wild card. Competitors can game the process to undermine a new facility. It can cost millions of dollars extra.
This is where my multiple personalities come out. CEQA opens up so much opportunity to have roadblocks, both valid issues of regulatory compliance and environmental impact, as well as invalid issues due to misuse of the process via comment letters, lawsuits for reasons other than environmental impacts. So CEQA is critical to get it right. In the statewide streamlined dairy digester permitting process, a statewide program EIR was prepared, significantly decreasing CEQA's issues and risk for individual projects. Another personality. Proponents must consider CEQA findings and mitigation. These requirements are important. They may not have been discussed before in a focused way. Entities are not necessarily working together to make this work. We need to streamline the project approval process in order to build infrastructure and markets. Another personality. California just streamlined the permitting of dairy digesters in the past few years. Whether we make an organized effort to streamline for solid waste facilities or not, the first few projects decisions will define the process. For the district, that may be faster than trying to have multiple agency collaboration up front. The organics diversion targets may not allow time for that. Yes, streamlining of permitting is needed, but then there is the reality. There are tremendous challenges to building in San Joaquin Valley and South Coast due to the air regulations. There's no way around it. The air districts can't backtrack on regulations. The CASA analysis show there is tremendous excess anaerobic digestion capacity in Southern California. It can make a huge dent in the LA organics through wastewater treatment plant, biosolids, biogas, alternative fuel vehicles, pipeline injection. These facilities can't take contaminated food waste. Sources must be matched with capacity. Publicly owned treatment works will suck up all the clean material. We really need to develop the capacity to deal with the dirty stuff. In the interim, where will it go? Another personality. Somehow I wound up. Yeah. While California has the most stringent air pollution control measures, San Joaquin Valley and South Coast still have the worst air in the country. We can't just focus on landfill diversion and greenhouse gas reductions and ignore the real health impacts of ground level emissions from business operations, whether it's a refinery or a composting operation. Every aspect of the composting operation, compost production, trucking, compost getting back to the field, all generate emissions. Most health issues are associated with internal combustion engines, trucks, tractors, windrow turners, and loaders. In San Joaquin Valley, summers, smog, and winters, PM 2.5, both are driven by NOx from diesel combustion. While the diesel engines are getting cleaner, still 40% of the NOx in the San Joaquin Valley is from trucks.
San Joaquin Valley farmers are trucking and shipping their produce all over the world. Are you saying we can't truck the organics another couple 100 miles to get the nutrients back into the ground?
Clean Air Act says mobile sources aren't addressed by the air districts. even though they are responsible for the majority of the air quality problems in the valley. But trucking emissions are handled by the lead agency through CEQA. Either impacts aren't significant or they have to be mitigated to the extent feasible. In my experience, this is a huge deal.
Who is the lead agency? Is it the county?
You'll start with land use, getting a conditional use permit from your local jurisdiction, probably the county. There are likely to be people who have never permitted a composting facility before. They may make the process onerous. They may conduct the process ineffectively, reducing the value to ratepayers, such as requiring all RFP questions to be shared in a public forum, inhibiting dialogue and preventing themselves from gaining needed insight about the project.
And Cal Recycle wants 100 new facilities by 2020 plus another 100 by 2025. There are 21 million tons of material, including 1 million tons of biosolids that are either ADC or disposed of. The state must show up at CEQA hearings and local permit hearings to endorse recycling and the state's objectives.
If California wants to reduce methane emissions and generate healthy soil, why isn't the state providing some kind of backstop to support local jurisdictions? Could I have a state-sponsored project advocate who helps me navigate the permitting process and educates the local jurisdictions as to the broader purpose and benefits of facilities like mine? They could use cap and trade money to fund advocates.
You may need to hire a consultant who can navigate permit requirements and help develop proposed technologies on your behalf.
If the state is serious about its objectives, success is based exclusively on the ability of local jurisdictions to approve siting. We see too much NIMTOO, N-I-M-T-O-O, which means not in my term of office. Public outreach is key. The state has a role to play.
The local politician. You mean the state should tell counties to get with the program? The state doesn't know what my county's needs. You want to build a facility in my county? You deal with me. You think you won't, you think we don't want our farms to be productive. If your organics management facility is going to support agriculture, we aren't going to have a problem. But there is a vetting process, and solid waste management facilities have to step through it the same as anyone else.
Some of the best locations when considering feedstock availability and amendment reuse locations are in non-attainment air districts or adjacent to dairies. These locations may also coincide with high vulnerability groundwater areas.
So does California want my facility or not?
We definitely want your facility, and we want to protect groundwater quality. A good place to consider is where is demand the highest. Agricultural land. Then you have to ask, is there vulnerable groundwater? What is the haul cost? Are there air quality issues? Do you have a plan to contain runoff? Generally, high vulnerability groundwater requires a higher level of water quality practices and monitoring. It's good to reach out to us during the CEQA process. We find that a lot of times project proponents are half loaded. You need to understand that we need to address potential discharge to surface and groundwater. The more information that you can provide and more accurate it is, the better we can assist and move the permitting process forward. You need to know things like depth of groundwater, site-specific constraints. Is there an impaired waterway nearby?
That not saying the cost of water protection practices and monitoring permitting fees are squeezing out the small operators. It is better to have 50 small composters than one large composters, 50 to 10,000 facilities of green waste. Just the land use permit for San Joaquin Valley, you're looking at $3 million and $1 million just for the Air Resource Board. That's one over and around the Stockton area. Guy was looking at doing it and decided not to.
Composting sites, if improperly sited, constructed, or operated, can be a point source of groundwater pollution. Practices and monitoring are needed to prevent this, but if groundwater is polluted, the responsible composter must clean it up and ensure that impacted communities have access to safe drinking water. The Regional Water Board's regulatory approach would be similar for any type of facility or operation that may pollute surface or groundwaters and impact human health. This regulatory framework is not something the boards have made up in a vacuum. It is demanded by the legislature in responding to their constituents' concern regarding past practices that have contaminated ground and surface waters.
That's a good question. Does the state really want these facilities? The regulatory requirements are cumbersome. Local jurisdictions permitting these facilities for the first time don't have a clue, and the proponent is vulnerable to environmental lawsuits. The regulations are not structured to encourage investment, and local jurisdictions are not operating in a manner to help minimize risk. Permitting costs are too high, and the state is not incentivizing with low-cost loans. We are 100% out of pocket.
You're right. There has to be a better grant funding process for low interest loans. Permitting has to be expedited. The state has to close the gap between its vision and the existing expertise and resources at the local level.
Well, Lydia Jade, you're composting over 5,000 tons per year of food waste. Per South Coast Air Quality Management District Rule 1133.3, you must have an emission reduction method of 80% minimum. When you submit a permit application for an emission control device, to see if it in your lifetime, you'll have to pay an expedited fee of $6,000 to get it in a couple of years. The emission source test will run about $150,000. Now I'm another person.
No.
Which one? 97, okay. I was jumping ahead. Food waste is going to be a growing market. More needs to be done to ensure it is handled properly for emissions and odors.
Food waste and biosolid compostings do need odor controls.
Many sanitation districts want to manage food waste via anaerobic digestion because food waste is odorous and anaerobic digestion requires little to no cleanup. California has no emission factors for food waste composting. Still must test to determine factors. It's daunting for Cal Recycle to develop a statewide program. The air districts attempted to find common grounds, but various permitting requirements create a barrier. CARB did adopt the strategy. Cal Recycle is to develop rules. However, Cal Recycle addresses food waste will drive South Coast Management District, Air Quality Management District rulemaking for green waste and food waste.
A uniform approach and single application would be helpful and expedite the process.
The agencies are currently working together to align efforts. Cal Recycle on recycling, CARB on climate change and public health, and the air districts on public health. This means environment plus public health plus economics.
We need to educate the regulators. They don't see it. We need to show what pieces they could drastically speed up in the permitting process to reduce the construction and capital cost.
CARB is mitigating the mitigators. Over 1 million dead trees in the Sierra Nevadas, and termites eating the trees give off more methane than cows. That's actual study, believe it or not. No, it's over 100 million now. That was a few months ago. Out of concerns of VOCs, they want everything in ASP, ridiculous. One size doesn't fit all. 6 to 7 composting facilities have closed in the last 6 years. No new permits.
South Coast mitigates mitigators because if they don't compost correctly, they'll emit ammonia and cause odors. Our regulations ensure proper management of composting. A cap of finished compost can have virtually zero ammonia emissions.
Compost gas on green waste windrows increases the chance of pathogen regrowth. Once a windrow starts cooking, you don't want to have it capped every time you turn. You're opening the microcosm to something new and can have re-eruptions of pathogens in the green waste composting.
Chip and grind must go to the soil or compost because it emits. It's aerated static pile composting may achieve pathogen reductions to kill weeds and seeds, which is needed before the distribution for use.
CARB sees the localized impacts from composting and transportation emissions. What does the industry see?
Green waste and manure composting don't need emission controls. Use of a 14-week standard 7-week, 45-day curing at 45% moisture will prevent pathogen regrowth. Green waste promotes regrowth of pathogens. Everyone's using a 7-week only. There could be a trade-off with air regulations, lesser controls to enhance a 14-day cure time, but there's no financial incentives.
Are water regulations quicker and cheaper to deal with?
Water permitting may be the trickiest and most time-consuming. The water protection intention may possibly also be the least beneficial to the environment. The Compost General Order requires some very expensive mitigation requirements which may further prevent non-municipal operators from being able to fund and develop facilities.
So to extend on that notion, the cost of an impermeable surface to protect groundwater really exceeds the cost of air compliance. The water permit is the greater impediment. In fact, using ASP, aerated static pile, with a compost cap can meet emissions requirements and actually save a substantial amount over windrow turners.
The Water Board oversees compliance with the Compost General Order. We need complete reported waste discharge information to enroll dischargers into the Composting General Order. The dischargers have time to install low permeability working surfaces and implement other best management practices to comply with the General Order.
I don't want to pollute groundwater, but is there a cheaper alternative?
The State Water Resource Control Board claims composting is polluting groundwaters. On the agricultural side, we have good information on nitrates not impacting groundwater. Dr. Mark Del Morte study on groundwater intrusion and nitrate sources 5 years ago.
Leachate is a myth. We found in our operations 1 inch of rain only permeates 12 inches of compost. If a pile is 12 feet high, it would take the entire year's rainfall in one 24-hour period before there would even be any possibility of leachate. Ironically, covers may not reach the lower perimeter of the pile, which is the most vulnerable to precipitation and leachate. Covering piles creates anaerobic conditions, example, methane.
Our facility is on a paved surface with an impermeable cover that serves as an emission control device. Water is recirculated through the system and reused as moisture in the composting process.
Our facility had to meet Title 27. Retention basins had to be designed for a 1,000-year event occurring in 24 hours, which is 6.5 inches in one day, in a location that sees an average rainfall of 4.5 inches per year. That's equivalent to a landfill liner needed.
Here is a place where we have streamlined the process to obtain a general permit through the Water Board. The Composting General Order is protective, reasonable, and feasible for these operations to be in production. And we support the utilization of composting operations to divert organic waste from landfills.
Yes, it's definitely better, but there are still discretionary aspects where the local regulator can make it unnecessarily stringent, adding cost and time to the project.
I'm confused. Are the air regulations the more livable of the two?
Other parts of the state can go to open windrow, not in severe non-attainment. There's much cheaper O&M for the competition.
South Coast doesn't require windrows composting to be permitted unless it's aerated.
And then the San Joaquin and South Coast air districts are not consistent with regard to their VOC rules or their diesel fleet rules.
All air districts are not created equal. The South Coast composting rules differ from San Joaquin Valley because there is more agriculture waste in the San Joaquin Valley as opposed to municipal feedstocks in South Coast. If the compost industry wants uniformity, they will end up with the strictest requirements everywhere.
But how about just some common sense? There's inconsistent categorization of facility equipment. Mobile equipment that remains at the same site all year, some districts consider stationary, but some districts allow it to skate as portable. The industry needs a reasonable interpretation and a level playing field.
The Composting General Order is fairly new. The hope is that this creates consistency amongst the water boards.
Will my project be able to absorb the cost of these measures?
Well, it's not necessarily about the most stringent requirements everywhere. There's plenty of room to standardize approaches in the common sense ways that benefit the industry and the state. There's a need for a simple process to obtain a short-term test permit for diesel equipment, for example. Green waste behaves differently in different locations. I can't assume that I'll get the same performance from cutting and screening equipment in Bakersfield with my feedstocks that someone else is getting at another location with different feedstocks. I have to production test equipment before committing to a purchase, but the vendor does not have the exact make and model in stock ahead of time to apply for a test 9 months in advance. These are simple things to take care of.
Well, if we want to talk about common sense, in the San Joaquin Valley, a farmer can pay the Air District $250 an acre for a permit to burn agricultural waste. But to chip the material, it ends up costing about $1,000 an acre. So is the Air Board basically incentivizing burning?
The district has prohibited open burning in all situations where there is a cost-effective alternative. If they can demonstrate to a third-party hearing board that there is no cost-effective alternative, they can stipulate a violation of the regulation and pay $450 per acre to burn the waste, but only on days when we have great air quality. We have a very sophisticated computer modeling system that allows us to determine how much and where ag waste can be burned without causing a problem to air quality. The alternative to open burning, chip and grind, finding a place to take the waste probably does cost about $1,000 to $1,500 an acre. If it was cost effective to chip and grind and take it elsewhere, we would require that to be done.
But even when you're allowing farmers to burn on good air days, you're ensuring the next day is going to be worse. Environmental justice groups in the San Joaquin Valley are opposed to combustion as a form of organics management. We support non-combustion methods, including composting.
The Air Quality District is opposed to combustion processes too. Let's all work together to make sure that there are cost-effective alternatives to open burning, including subsidizing composting operations that take woody ag waste. Currently, farmers can't afford to pay the tipping costs. There are no cost-effective alternatives, and that's the only reason open burning is allowed.
A major issue is the fragmented regulation of air emissions. The regional air districts control only stationary sources of emissions, while CARB controls the mobile sources.
I agree. For instance, while VOCs do contribute to ozone, the San Joaquin Valley would probably get cleaner air faster if it put all its money on NOx. But the Clean Air Act obligates us to control VOCs without respect to air quality problems in the San Joaquin Valley. It is a valid frustration that a compost facility must buy $1 million in offsets. It is very expensive to control VOCs, but it doesn't do a lot for food. A lot for air quality. Page 2. I know. Turning the page. The real issue is diesel emissions in South Coast. 80% of the smog forming emissions are from diesel vehicles, and overall 88% come from mobile sources. South Coast can't regulate them. We can only incentivize. We estimate we need $1 billion per year for the next 10 to 15 years to incentivize the upgrading of vehicles to solve our air quality problems. This year, South Coast adopted an air quality management plan. We expect the feds to approve it, which will save us from federal sanctions.
In addition, composting gives off non-reactive VOCs that count as a VOC, but the regulatory structure doesn't allow for that distinction.
From an air chemistry perspective, VOCs from composting and organics handling is less of an issue than NOx emissions from the transportation to and from the site and from diesel equipment on the site. VOCs from organic waste, we're anxious to accommodate if we can limit and mitigate the NOx emissions. Unfortunately, the Clean Air Act requires us to regulate VOCs and NOx equally.
While CARB doesn't permit stationary facilities, we are involved in high-level policy discussions because we have oversight over the permit and enforcement functions of the air districts.
While NOx is the most important pollutant to the district's efforts to fight air pollution, CARB is caught up in the state's effort to reduce greenhouse gases. A necessary part of our role as a regional air district is to keep CARB focused on our issues affecting health in the San Joaquin Valley. The state just adopted new oil and gas methane control regulations. We had to work the CARB oil and gas regulations team very hard to get their understanding that combustion of methane by oil companies generate NOx and cause air quality issues in the valley. Pollutants that cause health problems at ground level shouldn't be a second concern to the greenhouse gases. It should be a primary concern.
CARB is and always has been first and foremost a public health agency. We understand the emission trade-offs of certain actions, and we are not interested in achieving GHG reductions at the expense of public health.
Facilities will be built to process high-value feedstocks to justify investments. Will the market bear the tip fees needed to process the next phase of organic streams? Feedstocks will need to include food waste and dirty green waste. Manure will also be included someday. These streams have high nitrogen and high contaminants and will require special attention to the technologies and markets.
Composters taking green waste as the feedstocks are inheriting other people's problems. Chloridane is prohibited by farmers, but can be applied by residential use.
Anaerobic digestion food waste residual will be nasty stuff. Where will it go? Dirty feedstocks, no sorting, straight to digesters? Will the markets take this organic stuff for free?
For some composted and green waste materials, we've heard concerns that plastics are not well enough addressed. When the soil dries, the plastics become very noticeable.
Yes, and CalRecycle needs to recognize that most food waste is trapped in packaging, or it has to be held in plastic bags. Very few people will rinse out icky carts, and that would take too much water anyway.
Feedstocks should be clean ideally, to have a clean end product. That way the site looks much better. In 2018, you're going to have to meet the 0.5% physical contamination finished product. You might as well start working with your feedstock suppliers now.
CalRecycle must attribute the true cost to non-organic materials and methods, such as ascribing the environmental cost to the manufacture and purchase of plastic bags.
Mr. Page, a lot of composting processes aren't going to decompose the supposedly compostable bags, and they cost 6 or 7 times what a plastic bag costs.
CalRecycle views contamination as a local problem. They expect composters to work with feedstock suppliers to address the problem.
But composters don't want to be the police.
So just reject the load.
But where does that rejected load go?
Contamination can vary from load to load. It can vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. Composters need to gear for a wide range in order to attempt the California goals.
Film plastic weighs the least, but it is the biggest issue.
Of course, the Association of Compost Producer members do not want to litter the state of California. We want to produce quality compost. Is it reasonable for California to push this issue onto the plate of the composters? If they don't want contamination at the downstream end, then they may need to consider eliminating it from the upstream end.
Where are incentives or mandates for the use of compostable packaging? Where is the research for new technologies to remove contamination from finished soil amendment products?
Everyone knows that recycling is good, but citizens are oblivious to green waste contamination. We need a state media blitz and community education.
In the waste conversion facility, integration of technology and operations are critical. For example, our digesters can be very well integrated with the composters. The digestate from digesters can serve as good source of water and nutrients to the composters.
We need to break the hurdle of county ordinances. The California Association of Sanitation Agencies, CASA, and private composters are challenging counties with non-science-based ordinances.
Language matters. Biosolids versus compost.
I don't care what you call it. International markets are a major source of revenue for San Joaquin County. We can't sell our fruit to countries that reject fertilizing with biosolids.
We need government institutions to promote market niches for slope stability, filter drainage, stream bed restoration, cleaning for recharge, the IGP screening for storm drains, and agriculture.
The CDFA Healthy Soils Incentive Program is incentivizing farming practices that use compost to sequester carbon.
We need to look at the customers and end users. It falls apart at the customer and user part of the market. People assume compost goes directly to the field. Not so. Most often it goes to end users to blend or manufacture a new product.
The compost profit margin is too small. Notice the largest operations in California are funded by upfront fees for waste collection.
Green waste is the real issue. The green waste market limits the tip fee that composters can charge. There's not enough room to charge for the composting. You can't compete with the unregulated chip and grind operations.
And the AB 1826 diversion requirement has the potential to upset the market. Orange County Waste, for example, used 2,000 tons per day of green waste for alternate daily cover on landfills. With the AB 1826 phase out of ADC, should they mulch or should they compost? No single market can take it all. If only 50% went to compost, it would flood the market.
Do we insist on composted mulch?
Yes!
Soil Land can spend $100,000 per year on testing for herbicides and pesticides serving the cannabis market. Could have killer compost. The industry must self-regulate.
Regulators are concerned with risk. The industry needs to clearly define the risk, so the regulatory community knows what it's trying to regulate.
The pace of government adoption will not support achievement of the 2025 objective. It took Caltrans 8 to 10 years to start utilizing compost. Every horse stable should have on-site composting, yet the legal requirements are quite beyond the average stable owner. The biggest impediment to sale is the lack of understanding of simple soil science. Sorry to say, often this extends all the way to the landscape architects, government planning staff, and elected officials. Without demand, all is for naught.
When property owners import compostable material from green waste transfer stations, they must comply with the new CalRecycle regulatory requirements. The LEA takes the lead in regulatory oversight of land application of compostable material. The county confers on a case-by-case basis with CDFA and the Regional Water Board. Under these requirements, the LEA will be conducting pathogen and metal tests, or require pathogen and metal testing.
But it's only a level playing field in these markets if the regulations are enforced.
And where is the enforcement in poor communities and rural areas?
Chip and grind operations are easy to set up and operate. They come and go. They impair markets by not having permitted restrictions. Large municipal operations sometimes undercut the market. With biosolids as a feedstock, economics is less of a factor. The private sector can end up competing with the municipal facilities that do not have some of the same economic incentives.
It's important to understand the products, regulatory paths and markets, mulch, compost, biosolids compost, and certified organic compost.
CDFA is incentivizing compost uses. CARB's short-lived climate pollutant strategy has identified composting as part of the solution to the climate problem. Our emission reduction calculations assume that half of the organics will go to composting. The climate change scoping plan says, how do we get from the ideal to the policy that makes it happen?
Caltrans uses a lot of the material. There's a lot of mom and pops, horticulture. It's not one key group. They'll test, reject loads. They're picky with the product, and they all want OMRI certification.
We use a lot of material. We have rejected loads. For Caltrans, the compost particle size and trash content's key.
Nitrogen application on land must take into account residual nitrogen. You need nitrogen management plans for mass balance and to control nutrients. Each amendment affects soil and water differently. The use of certified crop advisors is important. We need more research on nitrogen management for organic soil amendments.
Indeed, but also cities should be encouraged, strongly encouraged, if not actually pushed, to recycle their own compost by land applying it in municipal lands.
Yes, but where does that money come from? Many small jurisdictions have no budget for hauling or spreading the compost. Spreading compost in parks would take away funds from police and fire, for example.
Manufacturers have to keep the compost cost as low as possible to move it. There are permit requirements saying that you can't stockpile for long periods. Agricultural users need a lot at a certain time of year, so manufacturers need to have space to store it. Then it's all gone at planting season.
Compliance with Senate Bill 1383 is a bigger issue for the Bay Area. They can't land apply in certain areas in the wet season. Don't have non-landfill capacity.
Anaerobic digestion creates a waste of methane stream. From the air district's perspective, it's okay to vent methane. It doesn't cause a public health concern. CARB prohibits venting methane because of its short-lived climate pollutant greenhouse gas strategy. It is possible to use methane as a vehicle fuel or put it into the pipeline.
ARB is promoting that biogas or biofuel be put into the pipe to displace fossil gas for haul trucks. Flaring methane has an adverse health impact.
It's very costly at this point to interconnect a biogas facility that is not near a robust demand. Extending gas mains to remote areas have prohibitively high permitting and construction costs. Rules are also nebulous at this time.
What are the prospects for sending power into the grid?
Well, it really depends a lot on the facility location. And to feed power into the electric system can be very expensive as well. The existing distribution grid was not designed to have two-way power flow, and we need to make sure the system has the capacity to take this extra power. We may have to upgrade existing lines and the stations. We may have to add communication for the data. We may have to have the California Independent System Operator involved. Again, this can be very costly and time-consuming.
There is a very robust discussion at the California Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, and CARB. This is where the public sector can get involved.
State agencies and local entities claim they want to see organics on the ground, but the permitting processes and mitigation measures are prohibitive. The private sector questions whether there are viable markets to pay good prices for all the compost that would be generated. Caltrans stands as a strong market, but finds it cannot rely upon consistent compost quality from job to job. There's too much contamination and no one has a solution for it. Is it the composter's fault if California refuses to control its addiction to sheet plastic and glass living on the upstream end? Is California leading the country? Can I make an honest living in organics management that's good for the planet and my bank account?
How are we going to help Millennial Jane help the great state of California? That's our appeal to you. That's the end of our scripted portion. I know that was a lot of information to put out there on the floor. Thank you for the applause for these people. It's really tremendous, I think. The expertise that's here and their willingness to share. And I should have done a better setup at the beginning. The several people who were not here that were Paul Ryan's multiple personalities and Jeff Thurber's multiple personalities and Dr. David Crone. They all were interviewed and they all vetted their parts, and regrettably, and Matt Rail as well, you know, Dave Warner, Tracy Goss, Matt Rail, and Tom Shearer. They were very passionate about being here, and you know, whether it is fires or gunshots or the pressing demands of our industry at this time and other commitments. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, these are real things happening in our state and in the world today. There's a lot of reasons why people couldn't make it here. So thank you to people who were willing to step up. But they did vet their parts. Those are their thoughts, so you know that. Did anyone have any thoughts or questions during all that they would like to pursue? You got a lot of people in the room willing to chat with you and answer your questions. Okay.
Sure, Michael Cruz, AD&T. One aspect that I was listening for and I didn't pick up on from the close demand side is everything's leading toward larger amounts of data. And tracking that data is in and of itself a huge job. But supply chain tracking and management is becoming a key that allows us to figure out where it came from, what you're going to do with it, what you did to it, what you can use it for. I think probably everybody in the group, if I had to guess, has some aspect of large volume big data management that they have to cope with. Comments?
Good, thank you. Thanks for that. I will be giving a brief talk on this subject tomorrow. Tomorrow? There? Yeah. Okay. There we go. I guess it's a wireless thing. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so we've been studying this issue for many years and finally putting together, let's see if we can get a bit of mic. Rotate it when it's cutting in and out. Thank you. So that we can get consistent data. What we're finding, we spent the last couple of years building a database just for what we call renewable carbon management, or managing the whole biocycle. And as you can see from all the panelists, there's a lot of stakeholders in this marketplace. And not only that, the primary stakeholder really is the generators, because it's the generators who pay. But it turns out that it's the generators also who use the material for the most part, particularly in the ag industry, but also in the landscape industry. And there is crossover, of course, in the food waste. So as we try to track all of this information, everybody has a piece of that information throughout the whole values, we call it value cycle rather than value chain. But how does that information get captured without both in real time, but also in a way that doesn't compromise, confidentialities. We think we have an answer to that, but we need to work with each of the stakeholders in order to make that happen. It's basically harvesting your operational databases from generation through manufacturing, through marketing, through use, to just take a piece of that information to generate a full picture. But that's on a county by county basis, because as you heard here, transportation is a key marketplace to move this stuff around. And that's where the haulers and transporters come in, along with the producers, as well as the generators, as we've heard. So there needs to be a lot more data for this industry to grow up, to become anything close to what we're doing in the energy industry, the water industry, or the retail industry.
Thanks, Dan, and there will be more on that tomorrow in your panel. Yeah.
Isn't Cal Recycle developing some tracking as a part of a new rule?
So I think Mr. Horowitz would be best to to respond?
The answer to that question is yes. There's two separate rulemakings that will involve some form of material tracking. As you may know, historically, CounterCycle has tracked disposal but not recycling. One rulemaking process that's underway is for SB 901, and that one's a little bit further along. And that's more or less an extension of what disposal reporting was, but it's going to take in some new kinds of facilities, and such as transfer stations and composting sites, things like that. And then ultimately, another regulatory package, which is sort of still in formulation, has to do with SB 1383, which is the short-lived climate pollutant program. That's the one that's going to move the materials out of the landfill 75% by 2025. So that one will be a little more comprehensive. That's still being fleshed out. Obviously, there's a great interest in not duplicating or being at odds with these two packages, and also in terms of what types of data you guys are already collecting. There's certainly an interest in harmonizing all of that, and the 1383 monitoring process is playing out this week, at least for its preliminary one. So we had a hearing on Monday. There's another one down south tomorrow where we'll be introducing some of those concepts.
Well,
Thank you.
there's more to that.
Johnny Moussa.
I don't know if all of you guys are aware of the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA. We have to have traceability of all the stuff that's applied onto the ground. I have a 99% traceability of all my compost, where it goes and where the sources are coming from. As far as I know, I'm probably the only person that has that here in the state of California. So I am FSMA compliant. But that's in 2 years, people. So we need to be monitoring where it's coming from in our collections sites, which there are programs out there to do that. They'll turn around and take those bill of ladings and monitor it from the time it comes into the composting facility to the time it leaves the composting facility. And that's a federal requirement, not a state requirement.
Thanks, Johnny.
I'll make one small comment.
Okay, and then we'll go to Greg.
And then, and that is that, I think the federal the state reporting is crucial, and it will get everybody in the habit of actually reporting what they're doing. There is resistance on that, and also the state cannot, by law, really track pricing. So we're going to have to merge the material tracking data with the pricing data, which can be done, and it's done in all other industries that I'm familiar with. And so that will require sort of a public-private partnership, I think, moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thank you. Thank you all, panelists. I think you did an excellent job of articulating what a complex issue this is, and what a monumental task the state has before it. I had a couple of comments. One, it was mentioned about selling produce on the international market being restricted by the global gap, which restricts right now the use of biosolids. We are working with Global Gap to have that changed, and they have been very open to that, so we're hopeful that they'll take an approach similar to what FDA did with the Food Safety Modernization Act, which allows biosolids so long as they're in compliance with 503.
No, that's false. Currently right now, FSMA does not allow the use of biosolids.
Yes, it does. It says human sewage sludge can only be used if it's in compliance with 503.
I beg to differ on that one.
Let's talk afterwards.
We'll talk afterwards.
I've definitely been tracking that. Another point to raise, I guess, somebody mentioned about the limits on VOCs in San Joaquin and South Coast Air District. And it is, I think, important to note that UC Davis has done work on the VOCs released from compost, either biosolids or green waste, and has found them principally to be non-reactive alcohols. So there's hope that some changes could be made based on that. And final point is, you know, compost is obviously a wonderful product and one that we certainly support. But non-composted biosolids, as long as they're in compliance, are also very beneficial to the soil.
I recognize that the study has been done, and South Coast as well as San Joaquin recognizes that as well. One of the problems is we have to go through the regulatory hurdles with US EPA and everybody to, particularly US EPA, to resolve the issue for the air districts. The air districts are not empowered to change the regulations for the federal government. And so it's going to be an uphill battle. Certainly we can work collectively through CAPCOA, ARB, and the local air districts to see if we can get some mileage in terms of that. But the primary responsibility rests with the federal government.
Dave Mallory from ARB. I just wanted to clarify that from our perspective, the VOCs that you're referring to are not non-reactive. They are relatively less reactive, but I wouldn't classify them as non-reactive.
That's right, low reactive, that's right, thank you.
Okay, before we move to this gentleman here, I just wanted to mention that Dave Warner from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District will be here tomorrow, a panel from 10:30 to 12, and he will be commenting more specifically about the dilemma of the districts with regard to the Clean Air Act and achieving clean air in these non-attainment basins.
Ricardo Serrano, County of San Diego, LEA. We heard that CalRecycle wants to site 100 facilities by 2020 and to add 100 more by 2025. And the challenge is at the local level to approve the siting of these facilities. I haven't seen in this panel a planner at the local level. We should invite a county planner, a city planner, or a representative of any planning agency to be part of the discussions, not only to get educated, but to work with LEAs and state agencies in the SIGMA process. So that could be my suggestion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Serrano, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and we're on a trend to get more local engagement. For example, I think there's far more local people here today than we've had in the last years. It is something that is lacking, we agree, and I'll be reaching out to you in the future. Thank you.
But we work with them.
Yes, absolutely. Does anyone want to respond to that issue on the local? Okay.
I'll just say to that we've had quite a few local workshops. There's going to be more. So we've definitely been reaching out and getting out there in the state to solicit input. Very easy to sign up for the updates on the informal process. And we definitely want to hear from the locals. But in the end of the day, we don't say where the facilities are sited. That is up to the people who are building the facilities to come up with sites, as you've heard today, and then that thing moves into the permitting process, and you see how far it gets. So definitely want to hear from local planning, and we've been out there.
Go ahead.
Out there soliciting input.
Okay, if we get a mic down to Paul, but I would just like to add also. I saw when Jenny Lester Moffat was surveying the audience, there were some hands that went up saying people are here from local agencies. There was quite a lot in this script. Complaints from the private sector composters saying, gosh, these local people, they may only see one solid waste facility permit in their whole career, and they don't have a context for the whole process. And I guess I would really, after Paul speaks, I guess I would love to hear what local people here think. Do you need more support? Do you think you're doing great? What is your response to this characterization of what's happening?
Just a couple of side notes on the whole planning process. I was a planning commissioner for a number of years, and so I know what happens when it goes through CEQA and so on. Recently, OPR, Office of Planning and Research, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, reauthorized the general plan guidelines, as well as in Chapter 8 of the guidelines, you'll find a reference of how to prepare climate action plans and so forth. So the ball is moving down the court. one of the things that we need to look at carefully as this is implemented, along with what Cal Recycle and the jurisdictions are going to do with the 876 issue, 15 years of capacity and so on. That's an opportunity for us to work through the local planning agencies and the regional planning agencies like the COGS and so forth to get some changes and traction in this area. In the past, I've helped Riverside County, Western Riverside County Council of Governments do their waste management plans and so forth, and there are opportunities, but as an environmental group, you need to step forward and cross the aisle and start working with those people. If you don't, you're going to get what you don't want. So my recommendation is step across the aisle and start looking at the other regulations and so forth, that you may find a wealth of information that supports your argument.
Just to add a little bit to that discussion, it's not get over the hurdle with the local planner one time. That's the one time they do it in their life. I've run a city compost facility for 23 years now. And it's pretty easy for me to go downtown to the planning department and get help when I'm expanding. We've grown from 5 acres to 100 acres in my career. So I've been in planning a lot, but darn it, there's new planners all the time in the same department. They promote, they retire, and you have to train the new ones too.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. I'm with the County of Sacramento, BERC, which is a Business Environmental Resource Center. We provide free and confidential permit compliance assistance to businesses in our region, which is kind of unique. One of the things that I had a question about was the RMDZ program. That was a Cal Recycle program where they provided low interest loans to businesses who were taking waste out of landfills and making a beneficial product. There used to be a point of contact in every zone, and that would be a good person at many points to start the process, because there's not BERCs in every county or in every jurisdiction. What are your thoughts on, I didn't hear any talk of RMDZ.
Thank you for that question. I'm pleased to report RMDZ is still alive and well. I think we've added one zone over the last few years. RMDZ does have low interest loans for these kinds of facilities. Every zone has a zone administrator that is your initial point of contact. And we also have Cal Recycle liaisons to those zones. In addition to that program, there's also a greenhouse gas reduction loan. So there's basically 2 points of entry for people who are doing compost or AD. It seems to me, just as a concept, that people would rather have free money than money that they actually have to pay back, but the free money, it is a lot harder to get. The loans, by and large, have capacity. The greenhouse gas loan is a little bit more challenging because you have to be able to calculate and show greenhouse gas reductions. The RMDZ loan is based on diversion. So the zones do not cover the entire state, but they do cover a lot of places, including a lot of places in the various areas around farms, as well as some of the city zones. So those are definitely viable options. I would say the big difference is that if you're really a bankable person who has great financials, it might be easier just to get a loan, but we do understand, so we're a little more forgiving, I think, in terms of understanding your business model and wanting to be a part of that.
I'll give my 2 cents on it. I'm a private composter, and it's kind of useless. If you don't have any money, then it might be a good way to start, but the loans and all the hoops you got to go through, if you have any assets, and you can go to the bank and get a loan. And quite frankly, I don't have much assets, and the bank will loan me a lot of money because they just like to do that. But I have a bigger pet peeve in the whole thing, and I'll give you a little story. We started composting in 1993, agricultural byproducts, and in '95 we wanted to add all feedstocks, including biosolids, so we decided to go get a waste discharge permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. 5 years later, and thank God one engineer retired, and a new guy came in and said, what the hell's taking you so long? And he got us a permit in 3 to 4 months. We got our WDRs, we've had them for 13 years. Then we come out with this general order. And the water board comes down and says, well, we want to take your WDRs away, you need to go under the general order. And so now I'm off on a whole new tangent of trying to comply with this. And that was with, they were exempting, if you had a WDR, you were exempted in the regulations until the last probably 90 days. Every time I'd get a new permit, I'd look in there, a new draft, and I'd look, paragraph 3, WDRs are exempt, and then all of a sudden they dropped it. But those kind of challenges are hurting existing composters, let alone new composters. And the requirements in the general order have no, we talked about a little bit in the looking at local problems. If you try to regionalize or try to go statewide, depth of groundwater varies everywhere. Yep. The risk is different. The amount of rain we get is different from San Diego to Sacramento to Redlands. It is crazy to have a general order and trying to get every composter under that general order.
How do you really feel?
Yeah, right. I am also a private composter.
Okay, I just want to be sure that it's not just going to be a riff. Okay.
I told you I'd be nice. I said I'd be nice. I promised you I'd keep my promises.
Okay.
But it is very difficult. I have a 30-acre facility. I'm on compacted clay. The pH of the soil out where I'm at is 8.5 to 10. They want me to pave my 30 acres. That's over $30 million. I'm an ag material composter. I have to buy my stuff half the time. I don't get a tipping fee. They'll shut me down, literally. And I'm shipping my compost 50 miles, but believe it or not, the last 2 years, I've been shipping it up north to Humboldt. Why? Because it's clean. They know where it's coming from. They test it. There's no residual pesticides in it. And I've got 3 sheets of 4 columns across of non-detection. That's why they're buying it. They're willing to pay the $2 grand to haul it north and have to buy it from me for $35 a ton. I do my due diligence. We're not contaminating groundwater. We have a 10-foot perched groundwater that is nastier than hell before I ever showed up. So we do, like Bob said, we can't have a round hole trying to jam a square peg through it. No matter how hard you do it, eventually, yeah, you'll probably shave it off to a round peg, but we need to have common sense when it comes to regulations, and that's the big thing.
So, thank you. One of the big issues here is, as he said, he does his diligence, is contamination. We see the state saying, get the organics on the ground to reduce methane emissions and improve soil health. We see the private sector saying, it's a lot of investment, and I'm not sure the market is robust enough. Then you see people who would like to use it, saying, but the issue is still, the market's not strong because you can't guarantee the quality. And we have here Jack Broadbent from Caltrans, who is going to give us a short 12-minute presentation. Caltrans, I think, is the only entity I know of that has done, over the last 8 years, a very detailed assessment of its ability to use compost on its soils. And for that reason, I asked him to give us a little bit of a concentrated presentation. So if people want to take, I'm going to say, Jack, do people need to stand up and do water in, water out? Let's take 5, a real 5, real 5.
Good morning, my name is Jack Broadbent. I'm a landscape architect with the California Department of Transportation. I've been working there for about 27 years. I'm responsible, I'm supervising landscape architect, one of 3 of that position across the state. And I'm responsible for all the standards for landscape architectural work. One of the key things we've been working on is revegetation of the highway roadsides when we build the highways. And compost is a key piece to do that, to bring the organics back into the soil. So I got a fun photo. I got to play one day about 10 years ago with maintenance, trying to figure out how to deliver compost in an efficient way onto the highway roadsides, and we got the snowblower. And it's very efficient. If any of you want to try that, use a snowblower. You can move a lot of material really quickly. Anyhow, we put it out on the slopes, and then we will till it in with a backhoe in some cases. Just to give you a scale of the projects we're working on, this is Highway 2 up in Angels Crest area near LA. That's a truck. That's our fill slope. So it gives you an idea of some of the land we're trying to deal with and revegetate. All right, so reasons for compost. You guys all talked about this earlier. Build healthy soils, infiltration, erosion control, and revegetation is where we come in. So a real simple picture on the back. You got precipitation. You can modify that soil structure. You get better infiltration. Otherwise, we wind up with places like Bryce Canyon, and that doesn't look so good in the highway environment. So we played with this stuff for quite a while. There was a comment, it took about us 10 years before we actually started using compost on a large scale. Some of the projects we've done, this is down, if you ever get the chance, it's down on Highway 1 near Carpinteria in the San Luis Obispo area. Surfers like to pull off the side of the road and park and go out and get out in the waves. So this area was really compacted soil and very difficult for us to revegetate. So what they did was they went in, put in a compost blanket, tilled it in, and basically within about 1.5 years, 2 years, we had a full native revegetated area with the natural environment of the prairie, coastal prairie sage scrub put in. The unique thing, the other piece we do is we spray weeds to control weeds on the highway environment. And we don't like using chemicals. So how do we get away from that? Compost actually helps us there. If we can get the native environment to come in, we don't have to spray weeds. This is an example of what we were trying to do to try and get the native environment to grow using either herbicides or using compost. So what I'm trying to tell you, it works for us. We love it. We want to use more of it. We have started increasing our use. Back in 2005, we messed around with it a little bit. 2007, 2008, the economy was down, so were we. And then you see our scale. We're getting much larger with the use of compost. There's threats to the use of compost, and we'll talk about that a little bit. In order to get us to start using more compost, the key change in the world was the certification requirement that you guys all work under, which is the SDA. We were having problems with having a consistent quality product. We'd get some compost out of LA, and it basically was straight out of the garbage. It was urban green waste. That wasn't compost to us. That really tainted the landscape architects in the LA region. They said, I don't want any part of that. And they stopped using it. So when we get bad loads of material, we won't use the material because it starts that kind of grapevine issue of compost is bad, I'll get garbage, I'll get glass, I'll get something else, and they stop. So that's what we've got. That's the threat, that's the fear I deal with. This really stopped a lot of the threat and fear. So, in some areas, we could use compost that might have a little higher trash content. This is in LA again, up on the grapevine. We were trying to revegetate what I called a moonscape. You could actually see this scar from satellite pictures from the moon. So we tried to revegetate it, and the way to do that was put compost out in a compost blanket and then seed over the top. Other areas we're working right along, like the Truckee River. We cannot tolerate any kind of contaminants that are going to get into that water course while we're trying to revegetate it. So there's definitely different levels of what we're trying to do, but trash content, quality, and consistency is really my message today. We had a bit of a challenge. We were working down on highway, down on the highway, Central Coast, I believe it was Highway 1, Piedras Blancas, which is a rookery for the elephant seals, and had some compost come out. Looked like it met spec. It had little plastic particles in it that surface, the film plastic, And everybody started getting really upset. And we wound up having the contractor, in some cases, go out there with a vacuum and vacuum the plastic off the surface of the land. That's not good for anybody. So particle size, we're trying to work on particle size. We have 3 main elements to the particle size. There's the fine, medium, and coarse. We like the coarse compost, which is really, we call it composted overs. It's a thicker woody material. We like to take that and blend it into the soil, open up the soil structure, and keep it open for a longer amount of time until the root structure can get down in the soil. That helps us with our infiltration and our water quality issues. So fine and medium seem to be fairly consistent. We're having some challenges with our coarse. We're trying to work through that. Give you some ideas. We started studying this a long, long time ago. I hired Vic Clausen, Dr. Vic Clausen out of UC Davis. He went up and did several different research plots for us. This happens to be up on Highway 20, where we looked at different incorporations of compost in the soil. This happened to be serpentinitic soil. It was really difficult to revegetate. And the green, obviously, is your compost, where we blended it in. And we were using different depths and things like that to look at what worked best. Here's an application of it down there along Highway 5 in the LA area. Now, one of our case projects, if you've ever been to San Luis Obispo area, you used to go through what we call Blood Alley along Highway 101, and we called it the Prunedale Bypass Project. A couple miles of new freeway going through a virgin land. And the challenge with the soil here was it was a prehistoric sand dune, so you basically got Bryce Canyon underneath the oak trees. So once you cut into it, it's going to melt, and we can't revegetate it. We used a tremendous amount of compost there. You see these zebra stripes, that is the compost berm, underneath basically a 2-inch blanket of compost, and in some cases it was tilled in. Very successful project. Took a tremendous amount of energy to get Caltrans Engineering and the funds to be able to do this and get them to recognize we need to do this if we're going to restore this land. But we were successful at that, and Scott Dallin gets all the credit for this, our landscape architect out of District 5, San Luis Obispo. So, results, day and night. Up here you got the compost blanket with the compost berm seeded. Down here we were still doing some earthwork, so we did what we call temporary erosion control. We had a 100-year storm event come through the site, and you could just crystal clear see where we were having problems and where we didn't. So it works. We love it. We want more. We need consistent quality is the challenge. Here's some more photos of it where you got a bunch of sediment moving. Sediment moving off the highway right away equals a lot of money coming out of our pocket going over to the Water Quality Control Board for fines. We don't want that. So you can see the sediment moving here, and it's stopped by the compost berm. That was that 100-year storm event. And at the end of the day, this is what we want to see. We want to see a natural environment, the green grass growing, the native grass. And if we do our job right, you never know a landscape architect was there because it looks natural. So I want to say thank you. I appreciate all the work you guys have done. I really am excited about the panel we had this morning and everybody trying to solve the problem. And my hope to you is that we can deal with the input of the garbage, which is the plastics and the other trash, and try and keep that out so the producers don't have to try and clean it out, and we're not rejecting loads at the end of the day. It's not good for any of us. So thank you. I think I kept it.
Anybody have any thoughts or questions or insights as to how we can handle the contamination issue?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Kessler. I'm with the Danish Trade Council. I have a quick question for Caltrans, just in terms of how purchasing is done. I'm not sure where that gentleman is. Oh, good. How contracting is done? How do you do? What's the process, real quick? And then STA. That's mandated by yourselves. Is that a statewide mandate as well for other private buyers of compost, or how does that work?
So you may have to remind me on both questions. But Caltrans doesn't necessarily buy the compost. We write the contracts, and then the contractors buy the compost and install it. So in one sense, we're a developer, right? We're developing the highway environment and we're hiring contractors to build it for us. So that's where it comes in. We do inspect the work, and the inspection, then our contract Caltrans inspectors will check the material, make sure it meets standard specifications, which is what I'm responsible for. The one piece we were able to get to was that STA standard, and that helped us say this is the standard that we're going to accept, and that allowed us to have a consistent material coming rather than somebody saying, does this meet spec? And if it didn't meet the STA standard, then we just reject that example. So that's where that is. It's not a statewide standard from anybody else, but from Caltrans, yes, it's a statewide standard. Does that help?
Maybe Jeff Sigebein could comment on the origin of the STA.
Yeah. Or actually,
I'm chairman of the Market Development Committee of the United States Composting Council that oversees the STA program, and it's the seal of testing assurance. And basically, it's a 3-hour presentation. I'll start now. But there's several components of this, and one of the things that was referred to is the actual Compost Technical Data Sheet, CTDS, which gives Caltrans one consistent format of reporting. The background on it is a compost facility has to sign up with the USCC, sign a contract that they're going to test on a regular basis. They then have to take their samples when they test on that basis and send them to a certified laboratory that's run by the USCC. That certified laboratory has to sign up with the USCC to be certified. They also are then, Dr. Bob Miller from the Colorado State University oversees the laboratories. Every couple of years, Dr. Miller will call me and say, send me 5 buckets, 5-gallon buckets of compost. I send them to Dr. Miller. He then repackages it and sends it out to all the certified laboratories and has them run an analysis on it. He then can tell which labs are giving outliers. So this has led to very consistent reporting of compost, because every lab in the country was testing at different levels and had different test methods. And so there is a document probably this high that's the TEM-ECC, test methods for the evaluation of compost. And those labs have to take the one specific analysis and it tells them how to perform that analysis, and then they do that. So it's kind of so you have regular testing by the compost facility, it's going to a certified testing laboratory, that laboratory is testing to a certain test method, and so you're getting consistent formatting across the country on, EC, electrical conductivity, all the pathogens, the heavy metals and stuff. Did I cover it?
Yeah. And we should add too that part of the requirement to be in the STA program is that you demonstrate that you are in compliance and fully permitted. And I think that's one of the key components of that, because before STA you can get samples from who knows where, and it could be from a facility that may or may not be actually using approved compost methods and demonstrating time and temperature and things like that. And I can tell you just from being involved in bidding jobs way back 20 years ago or something, one compost sample could show up with 3 different test results. And one could be from a water lab, and one from a soil lab, and another from another soil lab, and they look nothing alike. And so the STA program really standardized that, and that builds a lot of trust, I think, and a lot of quality assurance for end users. So Caltrans did a great job, I think, adopting that some years ago, and that's been really successful. I do have a question. Is that use data, the Caltrans use data, published someplace, the amount of cubic yards per year? And a follow-up, is that published someplace by district? Because when I talk to composters around the state, I see some districts are using more than other districts, and if you don't have an answer right now, I'd just like to...
I can come up with an answer for you. We do send the information over to Cal Recycle in a statewide report on what we're doing with it's the SABRAC report and another report. So it is public. I don't know how clean it is once it comes out through that other side, because they're looking at all the material that's being used and or recycled. There is definitely differences in districts. Our San Luis Obispo district is a early adopter of this technology and uses a lot. Other districts are still kind of not moving forward. So if I did a report for you like that, district by district, and when I say district, Caltrans is broken into 12 different districts across the state, for North region, Central region, Southern regions basically, and there's 2 or 3 in each one. And we have differences, absolutely. Some of it's based on projects, some of it's based on soil, and some of it's just based on our landscape architects not specifying it. So that's the part I'm trying to get over.
Thank you.
Mr. Oh, go ahead.
Can we change subjects? Does really want to stay on that longer?
I think we have a couple more on this issue. Are you getting off of contamination altogether? Or? Yeah, if you could just hold that. And did you have someone? Okay, Julia, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to talk a little bit about the contamination issue from the generator side. My company is Vegware. We're a global packaging company headquartered in Edinburgh, Scotland. We make certified compostable packaging. But during 2017, we decided to incorporate in the United States, and we picked California specifically because of these new diversion laws that are on the books. And one of the first things that we did was join the Composters Association with Dan and Melissa and Jeff, because with our experience in the UK of diverting food waste, we know that once you try to increase that, certain things happen that generate contamination. I want to point out, I'm working with Anna here from University of California, Berkeley, because they're an example of what institutional food waste generators, when they hear about legislation like this, they want to start using terms like going towards zero waste and achieving 80% diversion. And to do that, it's almost impossible to achieve those levels without, by disregarding the food that you left on the table, not a proverbial table, but actual table also. And the way to convey that food waste that's on the table, that's been partially consumed, the way to convey that is through packaging. It's all going to come together. Someone said earlier, nobody likes to wash out a container before they put it in the waste stream. And compostable packaging is an answer to that. It can convey that on the table food waste in a safe way. But it's, as you know, it's very difficult to do this without contamination getting in the stream. So how can communities and interested people who want to have successful diversion programs and protect our composters from receiving contamination so that they can sell to people like Caltrans with a good, consistent product, a couple of ways that you can help with that. If your community has, let's say, a green restaurant association or building practices that are, trying to get a LEED certification or something like that, encourage them to work with a company like ours to put together a quality protocol for zero waste food service that reduces and almost eliminates contamination. We can help them do that. A simple example of that is you don't want to have a compostable cup and then a plastic straw. I mean, that's an obvious contaminant that's going to happen. So there are a lot of things like that that the packaging industry can do by getting feedback from all of you and from the composters. The other thing is when someone like a university or a Google who feeds 50,000 people a month or a day, 50,000 people a day, and all of these institutional food services in San Diego, the zoo is a big food waste generator. Encourage them to take the time to put together a quality protocol for zero waste. Or what will happen is what has happened in Portland, Oregon. They jumped in and tried to do waste diversion. The contamination got so bad because they didn't plan on the front end from the generator side, and the composters got so much contamination they just put up a brick wall and said no more post-consumer whatsoever, which leaves a lot of food waste on the table. So thank you, Melissa, for putting this together. It's awesome, please work with us. We can work on the contamination issue, but it takes a lot of planning, community by community, institution by institution.
Thank you, Julia. That's really a key piece. of the puzzle. Okay.
Just to let you know, on the food side, for contaminants, there is a company in Mexico that is actually taking the seeds of avocados. 50% of the avocados shipped, or avocado product shipped here in the United States comes out of Mexico. So they're taking the product from the seed and actually making compostable, actual compostable, first ones I've ever seen, that actually break down naturally in the soil, bags, forks, etc. I've seen the product, I'm amazed, but they're only in Mexico right now. They're going to concentrate in Mexico, then they'll look at coming up here to the United States.
Well, I'm here now.
Okay, Michael, thank you, Johnny. Michael? Oh, okay.
Good enough?
And if you could say who you're with.
Yeah, Michael True, JD&T. Allow me to put my finger on another sore spot. Whenever we get into food waste, we frequently can trip over the decomposition of meat. What progress have we made now in satisfying the USDA's requirements for meat decomposition in the composting? And we know we've struggled with this on the anaerobic digestion side. There's a crossover there into the thermophilic. But boy, composting food waste, a hot dog will change everything.
Thank you. Was there someone over here that I can't? Oh, okay. This woman?
Who knows the answer? Do you mind passing it to me? Yeah.
Well, does someone want to respond to Michael's Bob loves hot dogs? Chris does.
I'll take a response. Yeah, why not? So Chris Sini with Denali Water Solutions. I currently am the facility manager for the new City of Phoenix compost facility. It's composting currently 55,000 tons a year of food waste as well as green waste, and it's a lot of fun. So in regards to the food waste, especially on Mondays after a big Arizona State football game, we do get quite a few hot dogs. We're working closely with the Compost Manufacturers Alliance to track what's coming into the facility and what's working as far as if it's compostable or not. So that's just something I'd point everyone to, is that alliance that's been formed between 7 or 8 large composters in this country. Just to point to that, but as far as the food waste itself and the hot dog or the half a load of fish or whatever it may be, I'll have to get back to you on how it's going.
Thank you, Chris. This woman? Could you say your name?
Hi, I'm Hilary Beckman from UC Office of the President. We do have a zero waste goal, and that's system-wide across the UC, and it's one of the things I look at. We have massive problems with our post-consumer waste, post-consumer organic waste. And I guess I wanted to ask the composters here, even those items which we are told are compostable and have been approved, we're getting rejected, particularly in our Southern California areas, to the point when people say to me, Hillary, what do we do with our post-consumer organic waste? I'm like, and I'd really like to hear both of your thoughts on where you see should go with this, because we want to be responsible producers of organic waste, and we want to know what the right thing to do is moving forward to help solve this problem.
Great question. I know that Chris Barnes probably has some thoughts on that. I don't know if anyone else would like to speak to that.
You're handing it to me? You sure you want to do that, Bob? Anybody else? All right.
Is Kevin in the room?
Kevin? Right here.
I think Kevin.
Here, I'll hand it to him.
Thank you, Johnny.
But I do have a comment. But I'll wait.
Go ahead, Johnny. With respect to items that are made to be biodegradable in compost systems, be they packaging or tableware or what have you, there's kind of a problem with, is it all or nothing? If you're servicing a large waste shed or a large urban area, it's pretty hard to get. Yes, you can get the UC campus, but you can't get 200 other restaurants to go along the same line. And so when the material gets to a facility, typical facility, not just one I operate, it's going to be screened out by humans or machines. The plastics are, foreign materials are. And oftentimes the humans and the machines cannot tell the difference between a biodegradable plastic or petroleum plastic. So there's a fundamental problem built in there. There have been some studies that have been done to test the actual breakdown of different items in the compost piles, and they've had a wide range of results. Everybody can read up on those. Mainly Biocycle magazine, I think, is a big keeper of those data. So those are just a couple of fundamental problems. If an area, whatever that area is, a town or a county, could go all in, then they might have a chance of turning that tide. But in the meantime, I think that a lot of the well-intended biodegradables might tragically be lost in the system. So, just our thoughts.
And also being, since you're part of the UC system, you know, UC, we need funding with the UCs. One of the big things, and it's the white elephant in the room that people don't sit there and look at, is when we're composting food waste, there isn't any research on pathogens, especially the hep pathogens or your viruses, you know, so there's a big, huge unanswered question out there that needs to be answered. Because if you've got norovirus in your compost and you're putting it out there on the field, guess what? That's picking up into the produce that's being processed. It's not going to get killed in a chlorine rinse cycle. It's going to contaminate thousands, not just hundreds, thousands, very easily and very quickly. So we need to sit there and look at that. You know, that's something that, you know, that's us as composters doing our due diligence. Before the 2006 outbreak, I was the only composter testing for 015787 in my compost. And every batch is tested. Not just every 5,000 cubic yards, every batch. Doesn't matter how big, how small, it's tested. Okay, we have to do our due diligence. Okay, because it's not an if, people, it's a when. And when that when hits, I don't want to be standing in front of the fan.
Jeff Sagenbein with the Association of Compost Producers. And the plastics management is a big issue around the members of compost producers around the state. And we've got 100 or so company members. And one of the big issues, I think, is some of the mistrust of the streams. There's been varied results on what breaks down and how fast it breaks down and will this break down in my process. And there's definitely been some success there, but a lot of times the streams come in, as Kevin pointed out, commingled with some stuff that doesn't break down. And just the cost and the challenge if you bring in and introduce any plastics into your material is just so impacting that there's fear and mistrust. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I hear from folks, and my project included, but from other members, that's kind of the consensus.
I'll just add one thing, because I don't think anybody touched on it, but the biggest marker is pre-consumer to post-consumer. I mean, we do Cal Poly, it's all pre-consumer in the kitchen, dedicated workforce, clean all the time. UCSB, it's mostly pre-consumer, but just a little bit of post-consumer and get a little more contamination. We did 150 restaurants in Santa Barbara for 7 years. You know, of course, their first 5 loads were just all plates that were compostable plates with compostable silverware. Worked great, but then as they got all the restaurants up to 100, and I think they're 130 or something like that, it was a lot more food waste and the contamination was unbearable. And the biggest problem is when you get post-consumer and you get glass. You can't get the glass out, you know, the plastic you can suck out. It's hard, but we're getting better and better at getting light film plastics out, but glass is not good.
One more. Oh, before we change subjects. Two more cents on the subject. Regarding money, in fact, I've mentioned in the panel discussion that plastic bags are typically 6 or 7 times the cost of bio bags are 6 or 7 cost the plastic bags. Case in point, we had 58 elementary schools to provide daily food waste recycling to. And we control the trash collection and all that too. So we did the math. We dove in the dumpsters. You know, there's dumpster diving to find out what's in it. And we found out how many styrofoam plates or trays they would discard in a bin, you know, in a school. And we helped them do the math, and they did convert to paper products from polystyrene products for the trays and such, because that worked for them versus the disposal fee savings we were going to be able to pass on to them. But when it came to the bags, we had to take a big gulp and say, okay, we'll build the compost system on the back end such that it can handle the plastic bag, because when you count the bags in a bin at the cafeteria at the school in a day, I forget the number, 45 bags or something in a week, do the math, and it comes out to around $45 a ton added cost to the system. Well, if the landfill's $45 a ton, compost tipping facilities maybe $30 a ton or something. And bagging is worth a $45 a ton increment. You can see the burden. Not to say it's not worthwhile to try, but it's just one of those economic barriers. So some trade-outs work, some don't.
Okay, oh, is this on contamination?
Yes.
Okay, great.
it is. I'm Catherine Brinkley, I'm with UC Davis, and I'm curious how energy recovery through incineration fits in this broader conversation of composting and methane digesters. And the reason I ask is I have a background in planning, and I've studied Sweden's energy transition, which has now built a giant economy around biomass, and a lot of that had to do with district heating systems and waste incineration facilities. And in America, we're squeamish about citing those facilities because we've traditionally done it in low-income communities and communities of color. That is not what's happening in Scandinavia, where Copenhagen now has a giant new municipal solid waste facility, and you can see it from the Little Mermaid statue. So the technology has improved, but it still doesn't seem to be part of the broader conversation on building biomass economies. And it gets to the heart of contamination as well, because some things are really hard to compost, but not so hard to handle in incineration facilities.
Great question.
Probably should hesitate before jumping into this, but I'd say there are 3 waste energy plants in California. There has not been one permitted in probably 30 years. I don't think we're going to be seeing any of those anytime soon. That is really something for the legislature.
And why is that, do you think?
It's just politically unpopular.
Yeah, I could explain some of the background of why it's unpopular.
Briefly?
Yeah.
I could, before Dan does that, I'll just say I'm hopeful that a small energy plant in my area, I'm in Bakersfield, California, is going to resurrect an old wood-fired plant. It was a 5-megawatt electrical plant built for orchard trimmings. And it went out of business, I don't know, it was 20 years ago or so. New technology from actually right next door here in Metro Cordova. There's a bunch of, I call them rocket scientists affectionately. They are working on a contract with my city to supply them biomass for a new gasifier. And gasifiers, old news, that's you know, what they said. The buses in Great Britain ran on wood gas in World War II. So nothing new there. But these people are putting a new twist on it. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is that we had them test what we call the screen overs from producing compost out of these organics. A lot of plastic caught up in the screen overs that are normally discarded in a landfill. They're very woody, but they're also very plasticky. And so they've done their lab testing. So far, they're saying, yes, those will be able to be gasified along with the wood in this new technology. Don't want to get too excited about it. I'm hoping they open up next July as they plan, but that's kind of current event news.
Is that Phoenix Energy?
No.
No, somebody else?
Clean Energy Systems, Rancho Cordova, and they've got a new affiliate they formed down there with some similar businesses.
Okay, Dan, I'm just gonna name that, we're gonna have a little enlightenment from you on that history. We're gonna pick up this gentleman's question that he's been politely holding. And then we have Christine, who many of you know was involved with a company that had a very lengthy and costly permitting process for a compost facility in Southern California. And Chris has generously offered to share his personal experience to some degree. And so that's another 10-minute presentation. So I'd like to wrap up what we have on the floor here in the next 5 minutes. We're not going to take a break. You're not going to leave. Okay, go ahead.
Just briefly.
We'll pick you up also, don't worry.
Yeah, we are heavily represented here by composters, not so much by the Bioenergy Association of California members, although how many of those members are in the room? Some of them as well. Okay, so there, other than compost, there has been a big push for bioenergy, and we don't feel it's either or. Particularly like all the folks that do anaerobic digestion, like all the wastewater treatment facilities that do, so I think there needs to be a balance between the energy. And one of the big questions, you used the word incineration, and that's kind of like a red flag to most environmentalists, because we used to do incineration. When I first moved to California, we had incinerators in our backyard, and that was in 1950s, but so it's always been associated with air pollution. The pyrolytic conversion, gasification, those technologies are very clean, and a manure gasification technology was permitted. I think one of the back in the back room there with Scott's Brothers Dairy, and I don't know if they're giving a presentation, but getting good. So energy and biochar and some other products. I always want to ask the energy people, where's the nitrogen going? Because are you producing NOx? Generally not. In combustion you do. That was the problem that was mentioned earlier. NOx are a bigger problem than VOCs. But where is the nitrogen going? Is it going back into the soil or back into the atmosphere? We want it to go into the soil. That's basically some of the ideas there.
Okay, this woman, and then we're going to go to the gentleman, and then we're going to have Chris. Go ahead.
I have a question for the composters. Is anyone either involved with or at least aware of ASTM and their compostable plastics, either committees or standards? Yes.
You mean the ASTM as far as the compostable plastics?
Yeah.
I've just heard presentations. There's a guy, a professor in Michigan that runs that for the compostable industry, bioplastics. BPI. Yeah, right. BPI has the license to use compostable, and to be labeled compostable, you have to send your product through the BPI to, I think it's Michigan or Michigan State. And they test it to ASTM standards. And then that's where they came up with the terminology that you have to send it, you'll see when the fine print says it's compostable, but you must send to a composter that is composting for 90 days or longer, I think is a terminology, something like that. Because it's not compostable in the backyard, and you gotta get to the high heat consistently that you get at a commercial composter. Then there's still problems with it, but it's.
Yeah, so again, Chris Sini with Denali Water Solutions. So we're one of the 7 companies that are involved in that Composting Manufacturers Alliance, which is similar to BPI, but BPI is doing most of the testing in a laboratory. What this alliance does is test those compostable products throughout the country at many different facilities in many different environments. So my site in Phoenix might compost something very differently than a site in New York that we may have. Again, just because of the weather, it may compost different, but in reality, the technology is completely different as well. So we're actually doing the testing in the field versus in a laboratory.
Can I just add, as a manufacturer of these products,
ASTM standards and BPI certification is key to everything that we do for assurance for the composter.
Mostly, I was just wondering how much input into those standards composters and people who are actually applying those standards would have. So that was the general question.
They have it through that process, but it's handled mostly on a national level. So those of us in California, we're a state chapter of the U.S. Composting Council, but I spend most of my time, bandwidth, just working on California issues where there are people nationally who work on those issues, you know, so that we can create that national standard. The STA comes out of the U.S. Composting Council and the BPI process on compostable, because they changed it from biodegradable to compostable because there's different standards there. But the people who are willing to sit for hours and hours and months and weeks in those ASTM meetings, they can do that. But they do test it back with the composters. You know, the composters are engaged in this process.
Great, thank you. This gentleman, and then go to Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Good memory, and thanks for calling me a gentleman. My ears perked up when we were talking about facility sizing.
Can you put that closer to you?
Yeah, my ears perked up when we were talking about facility siting earlier today. I'm Chad White with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I'm in our planning group. I was wondering if people could talk a little bit about facility sizing and optimal facility sizing, or how we can start thinking about different sizes of facilities from the urban core perspective. The smaller the facility, the more likely we probably are able to site it within our airshed. The bigger it gets, the more complicated it's going to be for us, and the more shipping and transport emissions we know are going to be associated with it. So I was curious if people had some thoughts about facility sizing and just how we can start thinking about those. And because we're close to the end, I'm going to be greedy and slip something else in there too. One of the biggest issues we're having right now from an air emission standpoint with facilities are those, are facilities that end up taking on more material than they can process quickly. So we have problems with things sitting in chip and grind piles for too long and starting to degrade, or things getting moved through windrows too fast and ending up being curing piles when they're still too hot. As part of this sizing, one of the things we were thinking about is right sizing, how much buffer, or how we manage to keep people at the right capacity so that they don't end up with some of these problems that are associated with excess flows, particularly as the SB 1383 bus is starting to drive towards all of us.
Great question.
Yeah. Dan Noble again. Within the U.S. Composting Council, there is a nationwide effort to look at all scales of compost. You can scale, you know, I don't know how many people in the room do backyard composting. Okay, so a lot of people have an intimate relationship with their discards. And that will continue, and we want to see that happen because a backyard composter is an educated generator because they know what degrades in their mesophilic pile versus the thermophilic pile. As you move up beyond, 500 yards at any one time, or is it tons? 500 yards at any one time, yeah. So there's a number of composters who are working at that level. Oh, it's 100, right? So we don't even know that limit.
100 cubic yards
Yeah.
on site, any one time. If you're less than that, excluded.
You're excluded. So if you stay below that, like LA Composting, which gives presentations all the time down in LA, and they started out as a bicycle compost collector, but now they've moved into creating local compost hubs throughout LA associated with urban gardens. And that's a perfect place to bring compost to the local community, put people in touch with the whole food cycle and all of that. So I see that the small scale is good for generator education and engagement, but as you get into the larger permitted compost facilities, which is what all of the members of our association pretty much are engaged in, you run into the issues that you're talking about. And I think we don't have good standards for that yet, at least between our discussions with the Air Board and the Water Board, as was sort of brought out in our panel. So I think this is a continuing discussion where that needs to evolve, along with the contamination, because the contamination is one of those issues. If you're a backyard composter, you do not throw your plastic wrap into your compost pile, right? You might even pick off the labels off of your fruit, because those don't compost either. So that's the kind of relationship we have.
I might try to address that
first of all, it's economics. Second of all, it's feedstocks. And planning on how you're gonna divide those feedstocks up to create a regional facility or a neighborhood facility. And to me, that's where the big disconnect is. You have too many fiefdoms. You have too many people that control too much of one thing and then don't want somebody else to take their stuff. And so, I'm just a private composter. I built the compost facility. We have a 40-acre facility. We built it that people would come. And our city was one of the last cities in the state to do curbside green waste collection. But we didn't press on them that they had to, you know, that we needed that for the, we tried to, but we weren't gonna get it, so we built the facility and we're there when they converted, they had to do it because of the 50, to get to 50%. But the question is so you got, you know, you take all your different feedstocks and you have different fiefdoms controlling them, and how you divide those up. You know, we're gonna lose a green waste contract that we have because the hauler got a 20-year contract by building anaerobic, he has a firm coming in building an anaerobic digester. They got 20-year contract hauling and for their landfill. They're not stupid. That's where they make their money. So, but that they got the flow control because of that. So to me, those are the big issues of how you divide that pie up and how you get control of it. I don't think it's possible, to tell you the truth.
Okay, I'm gonna, so.
Just speak briefly
Moderator,
to that.
Go ahead.
Maybe scaling cost favors a large facility, but in terms of where you put something, obviously a smaller facility is more palatable to a community. When CalRecycle puts out a number like 200 new facilities, we're using pretty round numbers. I think the average size of a compost facility in California is about 50,000 tons a year, not a giant facility. If you look at a typical Gore facility, they seem to come in blocks of about 30,000 tons per 8 bays. So that's sort of a little nugget if you want to put that kind of facility in the community. But we need all kinds of facilities, and the very, very small is important for a lot of the reasons people have discussed, creating this culture of knowing what the organics are, knowing what goes in that bin, and wanting to do something other than just make it go away. So I see a role for the very small, and we need to make sure that there's a niche for the very small out there in all that we do, because we don't know how we're going to meet these lofty goals, and very small is going to be a part of that, and needs to be a part of that. And people need to be connected to their food and their soil, and that's one way to do it. It's a cultural shift that needs to happen. Doesn't happen when you're just throwing stuff in a bin.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so this is what's gonna happen. I have many thoughts also, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you at the gathering tonight at Fat City. And Neil Edgar is gonna respond, and while everybody's attention is on Neil, can we get a microphone over to Neil? While you are all looking at Neil and listening to his response, Christini's gonna come up here and get ready to give his 10-minute talk on permitting.
I'm Neil Edgar with California Compost Coalition. We represent a little over half of the commercial composting capacity in the state on regulatory and legislative policy development. I would add to what Bob said about facility development, and to answer your specific question is it's very difficult to establish what the economies of scale are for a particular facility size at this time. We have new water board regulations. They're a fairly known quantity, but it's very difficult for a small facility to put in line pads, ponds, and conveyances that are going to meet the standards in an economical manner. It's going to be a local jurisdiction decision about what their price tolerance is. Air districts, 35 air districts in the state, 2 of them have rules specific to composting operations. Bay Area HQMD is beginning the process of developing their own rule. each individual air district has a specific permitting process that makes it very difficult to determine what the length of the permitting process will be and the cost. And then local jurisdiction costs, land use, et cetera, all of those things come into play, and whether or not you can build a facility at any relative size that fits the community's needs is going to be an open question. We still need to streamline the permitting process to help establish those baseline costs and what's consistent so that we can do this in a reasonable time frame. 2025 is around the corner. If we don't start building facilities today, actually we needed to start 3 years ago, we're not going to have nearly the capacity we need.
Good morning, it's almost afternoon now, but I'm Chris Sini with Denali Water Solutions, and I'm going to give you my personal experience, which went almost 14 years in total, on permitting a large compost facility in Southern California. So the facility I'm going to be talking about was located near Barstow, California, about 20 miles west of Barstow, 10 miles west of Hinckley. As you can see the star on the map. Most of the permitting was done through 2004 through 2012, and the facility opened in June, July 2012. It was a standard open window composting facility, standard EPA 503 composting site. It was permitted and then composted close to 400,000 tons per year of biosolids, green material, as well as inert material. So an extremely large facility in California. It was on 80 acres after all the permitting in CEQA was completed of a 160-acre parcel. It was 8 miles to the nearest home. We went out of our way to try and be the most remote compost facility in the country. I'm not 100% sure we accomplished it, but it was extremely remote, but still extremely close to the generators. And anyone in the biosolids world in this room knows that 100 miles, 120 miles is actually really close to haul biosolids in Southern California. It also was less expensive for all the generators. We had approximately 20 to 25 different contracts with Southern California generators of biosolids and green material. And we were closer, and it was a low-tech composting technology we were using. This is a brief, and I won't spend too much time. I'm going to go more in detail on a few of these in the coming slides, but this is what it took to open a biosolids compost facility 8 miles from the nearest home in Southern California. So I'm just going to run through it really quickly. The first step of CEQA was an initial study, and I won't go through all the different timelines because I know we're on a tight timeline ourselves. That then led into the EIR, or the Environmental Impact Report, where San Bernardino County was the lead agency in this case, both of which were initiated in 2005. That leads into a CUP, or a conditional use permit, which had 100 to 150 different line items that we were to comply with. Separate from CEQA, but not completely separate, CEQA's sort of involved in each of these. Each agency is dependent on the CEQA process. But we received a WDRs, or it was permitted as a Title 27 facility from the Regional Quality Water Control Board, Lahontan region in this case. Then we worked with 3 agencies in regards to endangered species at the facility. And that was a lengthy process as well, and it went from approximately 2006 to 2011 with California Department of Fish and Game, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Bureau of Land Management. We also applied for and obtained a Cal Recycle permit in 2007. The irony of that permit is we did our 5-year renewal permit before we even opened. We then went on to we had to get 3 source site-specific permits with the Mojave Desert AQMD for a generator over 50 horsepower, as well as a couple screen plants. Then there is one other one with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a jurisdictional determination in this case, which was made. The rest of them I won't go too in detail. They're all annual permits, a little less time and costly to obtain. And you can check them out there as I go on to the next slide. So quickly, I'm going to cover 3 or 4 of those that are the most complex in California to obtain for us, as well as anybody. The CEQA timeline, we commenced work, as I stated, on the initial study and the environmental impact report in 2005. That was adopted by San Bernardino County in 2007, so we were really excited at that point. It took a little over a couple of years to get there. And within the 30 days, we were challenged by an environmental group in California that will not be named. So therefore, then we waited about 13 months for the judge to finally issue his order in this case. And he asked us to identify and analyze the water supply at the facility, as well as to further analyze the economic feasibility of enclosure. A few of you probably know there's a few biosolids facilities in Southern California that are enclosed, and he wanted us to take a really hard look at if it was economical to do that in the private sector. And greenhouse gas analysis, we added ourselves. Greenhouse gases at the time was a real hot button issue, especially at San Bernardino County, so we voluntarily added that one to the supplemental EIR. And then fast forward to the end of 2009, early 2010, San Bernardino County finally adopted the supplemental environmental impact report for the facility. Quickly, I'm just going to go through a few things in regards to the water board and our permitting. The compost, or the green waste mixed with the biosolids, was determined to be a waste. It was classified as a waste by the water board at the time. So, and that was pursuant to CWC section 13050. So what that did is it determined that the facility would be discharging a designated waste to the ground or potentially the water. So we had to permit the facility as a Title 27 facility, but what that meant is the composting pad, or where we were doing the composting, that needed to be permitted as a waste pile. That's what it's referred to in the water board standard. And what that meant for us is the whole 80-acre compost facility had to be 2 feet, 90% compacted soil. We also then were required to build 2 surface impoundments, most of us call them stormwater retention ponds, that were to capture the 1,000-year rain event. So extreme precaution in an area that got about 4.5 inches of rain a year. The site was designed to capture 6.5 inches of rain in one day. So those 2 surface impoundments were basically small landfills that were designed to capture stormwater, of course. And they also were built with sumps and lysimeters to detect if any of the stormwater runoff was leaking or migrating downward. They were built with the same 90% compacted soil, then a GCL liner, and then a 60 mil HDPE. We also put in a monitoring well network, so we had 1 up gradient monitoring well and 2 down gradient monitoring wells, and we did quarterly sampling for the 5-6 years that I was there. We also, and this was a big one, we're required to post financial assurance as a composter, which that was extremely difficult, and in this case was a lot of money. That financial assurance was calculated through a closure plan as well as a corrective action plan that was approved with the local and state water board. All of this process then was completed in 2010. Oh, and there's the pictures of the 2 surface impoundments or stormwater retention ponds under construction, so you can see with full loaders in there the magnitude, approximately 7-8 acre feet each. So I think I might be one of the few composters, it sounds like, to be excited about the general order from the water board. But when they adopted the general order for all composting operations, I was jumping up and down. So shortly thereafter, I filed an NOI, or notice of intent, to be covered under the general order. And what this meant is I was going to have our WDR would no longer be, and we'd be covered under the general order. So everything from the previous page, a lot of it for the most part would be removed, the largest being the bond or financial assurance. And the water board was able to do this because our design originally from 2011, 2012 that I built exceeded the requirements of the general order. So it was really easy for us. It actually reduced the monitoring and and requirements on our facility, and of course, we had our financial assurance returned. And that was completed in 2016, and I appreciate everything the Water Board did to make that happen. So we also were in endangered species habitat, which almost every project has the potential to be in this wonderful state of California. In our case, we were located in habitat for desert tortoise and the Mojave ground squirrel. In the 7 years I never saw a Mojave ground squirrel. This was our biologist for about 6 years who cleared the site, dug every hole out on the site with 2 of his friends, made sure it was cleared of the desert tortoise, and he rescued desert tortoises. So we had an Earth Day event every year, and that was one of his that he'd always bring to the Earth Day event for all the kids to enjoy. The desert tortoise was regulated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well as California Department of Fish and Game. Mojave ground squirrel is only California Department of Fish and Game. In a little bit of strategy early on, we knew the process would take a long time. So we had to get access to the facility, and it was through a road to the facility that was BLM property. So we applied for and got a right-of-way permit to access the facility. And that also made BLM the lead agency to hopefully assist with moving California Department of Fish and Game along with our incidental tank permit, as well as Fish and Wildlife Service with the biological opinion. Both of those are extremely difficult and lengthy to obtain, if anyone in here has had that pleasure. So the site itself was 80 acres. The road to the site was 6.5 acres. So what that meant is we would have to offset lands after 4 or 5 years of negotiation, quote unquote, donate 259.5 acres of offset lands and manage those into the future forever. We also put in 6.5 miles of desert tortoise fencing, which is above and below ground, around the roads to the site, as well as around the entire perimeter of the facility. Quickly, back to Mojave Desert AQMD, they had a proposed compost rule when I was going through the permitting process, 1133, similar to South Coast and San Joaquin. In the end, that rule never became final, so I only had to obtain a permit for a Tier 4 generator, as well as a couple Tier 3 screen plants. So what do I do today? I now live in Arizona, and I am running the City of Phoenix's turned aerated pile composting facility, which, as I stated earlier, does green waste and a lot of food waste. Currently, it's 55,000 tons per year, and we're scaling it up to a 220,000 ton per year facility. 95% of the material comes from the 2 big City of Phoenix MRFs, so that material is already in their waste stream that they're collecting. City of Phoenix actually has their own trucks, their own employees, and collect that waste throughout the city. So they already know it's there. Now it's just becoming a challenge of how do we separate it and get it to the compost facility. Same thing with the food waste. It is a positive and negative aerated facility, so even an hour ago I was controlling the blower fans on the facility from here in Sacramento, and you can at any time push, which is the right fan in the right picture down below, air into the piles, or you can pull air from the piles into the biofilter, which is on the lower left-hand picture there. So at any time you could, if say you had an odorous pile, you could suck or pull all of the air into the biofilter. There's a 45-second residence time in that biofilter to treat the odorous air. We also, it's a little unique. One, it's outdoors with this technology. 2, we also capture and reuse all the water or leachate on the facility gets recycled, so nothing goes off-site. And that's a picture I took the other morning of the facility in general. So.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your experience. We have 2 minutes left in our slated time. I see someone with a question. Can we get a microphone over there?
Hi, Kathy from Sacramento County. I'm going to ask the hard question. How much did it cost in permitting and fees to open the facility in the Mojave region.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
Next question. I'll talk to you afterwards.
We have one here, Melissa.
All right, go ahead.
How do you manage the informational meeting that's required to have since you didn't have people around your facility?
Well, just because no one physically lives around you doesn't mean, under CEQA, you got to notify everyone within 2 miles of the facility. So, I was notifying a lot of people that didn't even have a clue that they owned the property. And that's why it took me almost a year to find the perfect property, because it was just hard to find some owners of these properties in general that I wanted to purchase.
Hello, I'm Marissa Nizawa with OC Waste and Recycling. Aside from your equipment permitting for AQMD, did you have to do any kind of other permitting for VOC or methane or anything like that?
Yeah, good question. One of the primary reasons we put the facility where it is, it's in the Mojave Desert AQMD, much better air quality, and there's a lot of much smarter people than me in the room that can talk more in length to this, but has much better, cleaner air there than in South Coast or San Joaquin. So we knew there wasn't a compost rule on the books. I knew the likelihood of there ever being a compost rule on the books was near zero, because their air quality actually over the last 20 years has been improving. And they only get most of their bad air that comes over the mountain from LA.
Okay. One more question? Neil?
Less of a question than a comment. I want to say that in my experience, and I've permitted well over 20 facilities, over time, the perception that there are no markets is largely incorrect. There's not enough supply, so the facilities that produce compost largely sell about everything they can produce. The largest problem we have with getting infrastructure built is that local jurisdictions have not yet developed collection programs. They have not established rate structures. They've not established long-term contracts, and there's no flow control that will get facilities up and running. Once we resolve that at price points that operators can thrive at, we will have all the capacity that we can use, and I believe the markets will follow. Northern California has mature markets that have been developed over many decades. But if you look at ag production, and ag is certainly the largest potential market for all this material, the largest county in the state in production is Tulare, Kern, Fresno, Ventura is 8th, Kings is 9th, Imperial is 11, San Diego is 12, Santa Barbara is 13, Riverside 14. Those are not, the Northern California counties don't even come into the top 15. So the same operators, Hanamura and Antle, Grimway, the large growers that buy compost in the Central Coast and Central Valley are operating facilities in the Imperial Valley and Coachella Valley. Same growers, they know the benefits of buying the product, but they don't have supply. So I think if we build it, they will come.
And that's what we did with that facility. We took an enormous risk in the thought process of if we build it, invest a massive amount of money and time, they will come. Luckily for us, they did.
Thank you, Chris. So we're going to close, and out of respect for the people who have to start at 1 o'clock, we need to get moving. One more big thank you to the panelists, and a thank you to Denali, Holloway, Synagro, and Liberty for sponsoring this event and sponsoring the 5:30 to 9:30 gathering tonight at Fat City. We hope to see many of you there and continue the conversation.